あ、ということは向こう気づかないですね。
気づかない。
はい。
で紹介された時に、あんまり大きい他にも関係者が大勢いるから、よしですよね、よしです。じゃあこちらにいるのが。
ああ、どうも他の人とは違うと思ってた。
Greetings, this is Reverend Paul, and this is Studio Chojin RAW. I hope everybody's doing well out there, and thank you for clicking on this video. Today, we're going to be talking about Dorohedoro, but before we do that, I should probably mention that last week I conducted Studio Chojin's first Twitter poll, asking you guys, the audience, what should be the topic of Studio Chojin's first manga review. And the choices were Chainsaw Man and Legend of Mother Sarah. And overwhelmingly, Chainsaw Man won the poll. So it looks like Chainsaw Man will be the subject of Studio Chojin's first manga review, which is cool. I mean, I hear a lot of cool things. I have not read the series yet, but people tell me a lot of cool things about it. The art looks pretty awesome, so I'm definitely looking forward to checking it out. I definitely want to talk about Legend of Mother Sarah at some point. I think it's a series that often gets overlooked when people talk about Otomo's body of work, so I definitely want to give it some attention. I guess it'll be the subject of the second manga review that I do. I want to launch the manga review show before summer's over. There's a couple of things I need to do before I can post the review. I'm basically making an entire show from scratch. So I have to make a background for it. I have to record music for it. I gotta read the manga. So there's a lot of shit that I gotta do before I could post the video, before I could finish the video. So I'm gonna do my best to get this stuff out before summer's over. I realize the clock is ticking. I've also decided that Adventure Kid will be the topic of Studio Chojin's first hentai review. I thought about reviewing other hentai titles like Angel of Darkness or Angel Blade, but Adventure Kid seems oddly fitting, being that I'm a huge fan of Toshio Maeda. This channel, of course, is called Studio Chojin after Urusuke Doji, so I definitely feel like a Toshio Maeda review is the best way to kick off Studio Chojin's hentai review show. I'm also hoping to have that up before summer's over. I don't know if that's going to be possible, but I'm going to do my best to make it happen. So, Dorohedoro is a manga series written by Q Hayashida, who actually got her start doing a manga adaptation of the Dreamcast game Maken X, which is an awesome yet underrated game. Now, Dorohedoro is about this character named Kaiman, who has a curse placed on him that erases his memories and turns his head into a lizard head. And the series follows Kaiman as he tries to find the sorcerer who placed the curse on him, and as he tries to regain his lost memories. The entire series takes place in this low fantasy, post-apocalyptic, cyberpunk-esque world. Even though I guess cyberpunk isn't really the best way to describe it because it's not science fiction. So like, what is the fantasy version of cyberpunk? Is it elf punk, sorcerer punk? It's one of those things. Anyway, so it's this low fantasy kind of post-apocalyptic world, and it's a very unique setting, and it actually feels a lot like something ripped from the pages of Heavy Metal magazine. It seems like Q Hayashida was influenced by people like Mobius, Simon Beasley, and definitely Katsuhiro Otomo. There is a lot of Akira influence in Dorohedoro, and not just the kind of post-apocalyptic setting, definitely in the designs of the characters. And Q Hayashida, to me, almost feels like the heir apparent of Otomo. She does a really great job of capturing certain nuances of Otomo's style, but at the same time reinventing it to her own style. It really does feel like a 21st century version of Otomo's artwork. Dorohedoro has a lot of action and it's ultra violent. It's one of the most violent animes you'll ever see. But, I mean, don't be fooled. I mean, this is a comedy. It actually reminds me a lot of like a Tokyo Shock movie. There's a lot of it that reminds me of Ichi the Killer. And now that I think of it, I think the best way to describe Dorohedoro is imagine if TROMA made an anime. The tone of this completely feels like a TROMA movie. Now, I mentioned previously that the core of Dorohedoro is this mystery as to who Kaiman is. And I actually think that's kind of the weakest part of the series because, I mean, from my perspective, I think giving your character amnesia is kind of a cheap plot device. You know, it's a good way to kind of build intrigue without having to do a lot. If you start your story off by giving your main character amnesia, a lot of the burden of trying to like weave the backstory into the story in an interesting way kind of goes away because now you've made his backstory the plot of the show. But even though it's the weakest aspect of the show, it does does work. The mystery of who Kaiman is driving the narrative forward, but it's not really about that. It's more about these characters. A lot of this feels a lot like a sitcom. I mean, there's a zombie episode, there's a baseball episode. A lot of the characters are just doing random shit. And this is a show with a lot of personality. I think there's an instinct to say that it's very stylistic, but I think that wouldn't be accurate. The best way to describe it is it's a show with a lot of style, but it's a show with even more personality. The characters really are the bread and butter of this series. It's what makes this series so appealing, is that these characters are so charming and likable, and they're really fun to watch. Now, Kaiman is the de facto main character of the series, in the sense that he is the main focus of the series. But you can't really say he's the star of the series, because Dorohedoro is really an ensemble piece. All the characters share screen time equally. In addition to Kaiman, we get Nikaido, who is Kaiman's best friend, and she actually reminds me of Kome from Blue Seed. I guess it's because she wears that jumpsuit. There's also Shin, who's a sorcerer. He wears a heart-shaped mask, and he uses a claw hammer as a weapon. He actually kind of feels like he's probably inspired by Old Boy. There's also Shin's partner Noi, who is really cool. She's cute, but she's this big, like, muscular chick, and she actually reminds me a lot of Chiyoko from Akira. Noi and Shin make a really good pair. Noi is perky and super optimistic, and Shin is a little bit more down and a little bit more self-serious. In a lot of ways, the relationship between Noi and Shin parallels the relationship between Kaiman and Nikaido. There's also Ebisu, who's a lot like Noodle. She actually reminds me a lot of Noodle from the Gorillas. Ebisu is awesome. I think Ebisu is my favorite character in the series. She just gets into these fucking weird situations. Like in the very first episode, she gets her face ripped off. Then, you know, they heal her and she's okay. Then like in the next episode, she's having her brain being eaten by a zombie. It's so fucking crazy. But she's awesome. Ebisu is great. There's also an episode where the sorcerers are throwing a party and Ebisu has to get measured for a dress. And then she becomes jealous that Noi has bigger boobs than her. So then like Ebisu gets a dress that has like big boobs built into it. So then she's just like dancing around with these giant boobs. It's hysterical. Rounding out the cast, there's Ebisu's friend Fujita. There's En, who's basically, I mean, he's the closest thing you get to a villain in the series. And then there's Johnson, who's the giant cockroach who only says shocking. Johnson is awesome. He's probably my second favorite character, or maybe even like Johnson and Ebisu are tied for like my favorite characters in the series. Johnson is just so fucking random. He's this giant mutant cockroach who wears sneakers, and all he says is shocking. And what makes it even better is when he says shocking when something shocking happens. There's this episode where Shin's about to kill this doctor guy, and then like right before he's about to kill him, Shin realizes the doctor is a person that saved him before in the past. And then Shin is like, oh my god, you're that guy. And then Johnson's like, shocking. It's fucking awesome. It's also worth noting that Dorohedoro is a show without villains. There really aren't any villains in the traditional sense in this show. It's a great example of protagonists and antagonists, and how your protagonists aren't necessarily good guys and your antagonists aren't necessarily bad guys. You basically just have characters with conflicting goals. Even the character En, who's the closest thing we get to the villain, he's a sympathetic character in the sense that he is a character who is just trying to kind of like avenge the death of his friends or protect his friends. And what's also interesting is that the characters are all likable. They're all extremely charismatic. They're all extremely likable, but they're also murderous psychopaths. Like, they are not good people. All the characters in this show just fucking kill people and do violence to people without any kind of hesitation. But they're all instantly very, very charming, which is why, like I said, it reminds me almost of like a TROMA movie, in the sense that, like, I mean, even when you think about it, Kaiman really is the toxic Avenger. I mean, he's this crazy character and he's murderous and he's fucking violent, but he's funny and charming and likable. It really shows you what a skilled writer Kyu Hayashida is, because she writes her characters with a lot of humor and a lot of pathos, and it adds a lot of dimension to their personalities. So regardless of the horrible things that they do, you will always like them and sympathize with them. I also think Dorohedoro is deceptively deep. I think when you first watch it, you may have an instinct to dismiss it as just kind of some crazy splatterpunk comedy, but I do think there's a lot of interesting subtext and ideas here. At its core, I would say Dorohedoro is a show about friendship. Our gateway into this world is Kaiman and Nikaido, the two best friends. But interestingly, every character is broken up into pairs. So there's Shin and there's Noi. And then there's Ebisu and Fujita. And En even has that little dog that's his friend. Everybody here is paired off with a best friend. So the idea of best friends is definitely a running theme. And there's also this very cool touch of the fact that all the sorcerers wear masks. And you can't help but think that the show is commenting on the emotional masks we wear in our relationships with other people, specifically our relationships with our friends. Even Kaiman is kind of a great encapsulation of this, in the sense that Kaiman's true face has been changed into a lizard head. So his lizard head is kind of like a mask, but on top of that, he wears a mask on top of his lizard head. And also, there is a person living inside his mouth. He has an inner self that he is not truly familiar with and other people really aren't aware of. We even find out later on in the show that Nikaido isn't exactly what she appears to be. She is lying to Kaiman too, so she is also wearing a mask. It's a really great metaphor for how we hide certain aspects of ourselves from the people we're closest to, and how we even hide certain aspects of our personality from ourselves. I mean, they really don't directly address the idea of masks in this first season. I'm wondering if they do it in the manga, and I actually, after watching this, first 12 episodes of Dorohedoro, I'm actually really eager to check out the manga. In case you can't tell, I really like Dorohedoro. I thought it was awesome. I definitely want to go and check out the manga and see how far they extend that mask metaphor. I think you could also look at this show as a commentary on duality. There's definitely something to be said about the way the mask represents two sides of a person, but also there's this kind of greater idea of duality that extends to the world, because in this show there are two worlds. There's a human world and there's a sorcerer world. And the worlds are presented very, very differently. And you could especially see this in the couple of pages I've seen from the manga, where you look at the human world and it's drawn in a kind of watercolor style, and there are these stains of washes that are indicating texture and grime on the walls. And then you look at the sorcerer world, which actually has kind of this thick oil painting style to it. And it really creates this interesting juxtaposition between these two environments. And it's certainly commenting on this issue of class, and it's something I want to spend more time thinking about, because it seems pretty clear there's a lot of social commentary going on under the hood of Dorohedoro. I also like the way the world of Dorohedoro, specifically the human world, feels lived in. It's very gritty, and even a character like Shin, I love the fact that his clothes are always bloody, and it does a good job of fleshing out who he is, in the sense that, he's this murderous guy who kills people, so of course his clothes would be stained with blood. It always kind of bothers me in cartoons and shit like that, in animation, where everybody always has these perfectly clean clothes. I like the fact that this world feels dirty, and it even extends into the attire the characters are wearing. One thing that I thought was strange in terms of the art style was that the characters have no nipples. There are scenes where the characters get naked and they have no nipples. They have the body of a Barbie doll. It's fucking weird. If you go back into the manga and you look at the scenes that the anime is depicting, in the manga the characters have nipples, but for whatever reason they take the nipples out in the anime. I'm guessing that's some kind of Japanese censorship, maybe. It's a Netflix show, but maybe they want to get it syndicated on Japanese TV, and maybe Japanese TV doesn't like nipples on characters now. I don't know. It just seemed like a strange thing to do. I think it's also worth pointing out that the relationships of these characters are at the core of the story. But another thing that's interesting is that the relationships never extend into romance. The characters always stay platonic friends. And I think that's actually a really interesting choice. And I like that, because I never understood the kind of need to constantly link men and women romantically in stories. Every time you have a story with a male character and a female character, especially in Western fiction, they always have to hook up. It's impossible for a man and a woman to be friends in an American movie or TV show. Sooner or later, they're going to have to start fucking. So I do appreciate the fact that this is a story about exploring the platonic friendships between men and women. But overall, I really like Dorohedoro. I think it's a very interesting show. It has a lot of substance and it has a lot of style. And if you watched Batman Ninja and said, okay, this looks interesting, but there's fucking nothing here, it's just crazy shit for the sake of crazy shit, Dorohedoro is definitely an improvement, in the sense that Dorohedoro has a lot of style, but it also has a lot of substance. The animation is done using CGI, but honestly, it doesn't really feel like CG. A lot of shots in here feel hand-drawn. Even when you can tell it's CG, it always works, and the characters always blend well into the scenery. It really feels like a living graphic novel. I mean, honestly, in a lot of ways, it feels a lot more like the 1981 Heavy Metal movie than a traditional anime. But it's a really cool show. I really like it. I want to do another video on it. I want to read the manga and I want to do more of an analysis on it. So I guess you could think of this video as just kind of like a first reaction of Dorohedoro, but I definitely want to do another video exploring more of the themes and more of the ideas. There's only one season right now. They haven't announced a second season. I'm really hoping they do, but even if they don't, in the meantime, I'm definitely going to get into the manga, and this is a great show, and I recommend you guys go check it out. It's really cool. So yeah, I guess that's all I got to say for now. So anyway, this is Reverend Paul saying, until we meet again.